In the 16th century, the Spaniards who invaded the Inca state discovered that its huge 5,000-kilometer territory stretched from Colombia to Chile was successfully governed as an empire of unprecedented scale. The main question was, how did they manage such a vast empire effectively without a written language or an obvious mathematical system?
And the principal device for accounting was the quipu, this knotted string, generally colorful device that was used for recording various kinds of information.
So these are record-keeping devices that the Incas used primarily for recording administrative information. They recorded censuses, tribute, resources in state storehouses, etc.
One theory suggests the Inca didn't develop a language-specific writing system due to their diverse multilingual population. Or perhaps they already had one?
So basically, when we're talking about quipus, there were essentially two different types of quipus. So there was one type of quipu for administrative work. There was another type, though, that, as we're told by the Spanish chroniclers, recorded historical narratives, recorded poems, recorded songs, all sorts of narratives telling the life history of the Incas, etc.
Anthropologist Gary Urton identified a binary array coding system in quipus, describing each knot as a 7-bit array, similar to ASCII or ASCII coding. Later researchers further explored the weaving rules of quipu, viewing them as advanced data structures with formal grammar, similar to modern Bacchus-Naur form, or BNF, in computer science. In the computer analogy for quipus, they feature a front-end interface, which is a tactile 3D design made of knots, and a graphical user interface indicated by the color differentiation of threads. They might have a back-end system involving the hierarchical organization of threads. These threads are scalable, backward compatible with older quipu versions, and can interface with arrays of stones, beads, or other counters, making them easily translatable into computer code. Quipu even has a distinct feature of hypertext, shown through the branching of threads. This raises the question, did the Incas use an early analog computer made of knots and threads, or was it something else entirely? The quipu is as ancient as Egyptian hieroglyphs and Sumerian cuneiform, dating back to at least 3000 BCE. It is one of humanity's prehistoric tools for communication, and they were used alongside another unusual artifact known as yupanas.
They didn't do calculations with the quipus. The quipus were knotted with numerical values that were calculated elsewhere. We think they used these devices called yupanas that are counting boards. But they did all the calculations over there with kernels of corn or with pebbles in these counting devices. And then when they had the values, they recorded them on the quipu. So what we're looking at with the quipu is the results of calculations.
Some of these artifacts, divided into rectangles, puzzled experts, with theories ranging from fortress models to game boards or toys. The mystery continued until Italian engineer Nicolino de Pasquale, reading about Incan culture, found a 16th century Spanish manuscript with a drawing of rectangular cells arranged in 5 rows and 4 columns, providing new clues about their purpose. As an engineer with a solid understanding of mathematics, Pasquale quickly noticed that the number of circles in the cells followed the Fibonacci sequence, where each number is the sum of the previous 2. In less than an hour, he realized that the matrix was a type of counting board, similar to an abacus, but based on the number 40 instead of 10. Interestingly, the abacus doesn't count as analog. Its discrete counters make it one of the earliest digital computers. Pasquale found that the Yupana's counting system could be converted into a computer algorithm, leading him to program an electronic calculator based on this logic. Some ethnographers note the significance of the number 40 in ancient Andean cultures, especially in textiles, suggesting the Incas may have inherited this system. In defense of his hypothesis, De Pasquale showed that base 40 calculations are noticeably faster and can easily be reduced to base 10. Professor Aimi examined 15 different yupanas and confirmed that all of them are working perfectly as calculators, as proposed by De Pasquale, and that most yupanas use either a base 10 or base 40 system. However, the variety of yupana designs suggests that both systems, or possibly even more, could have been used simultaneously. The 3D yupanas, made of stone, wood, or clay, vary in shape but follow a common design. If De Pasquale is correct, all 1, 2, and 3 level yupanas can be traced back to just 2 base systems. The differences in base systems might also relate to the yupana's role, either for everyday calculations or for specialized QUIPU-related computations. The full purpose of the 3D yupanas remains unclear, as much of the knowledge about them was intentionally destroyed during colonization.
But in terms of the calculation, again, here, the calculations that recorded here get done in these constructions called yupanas. And we're told in some of the Spanish chroniclers that they were moving around corn kernels or small pebbles, small stones, doing their calculations. And those then would get recorded on the quipu. And here's a drawing by Wamampoma that shows one of these calculators and the quipu. And no, I don't think, by the way, that's those panels of squares. Just to say, because it looks a lot like those panels of squares, but I think this is truly a calculator, and that those panels of squares are something else.
Other researchers like Cinzia Florio also suggested that 3D yupanas, or table yupanas, might have served purposes beyond simple calculations. She states, "We cannot say with certainty what this object was. The only thing we can affirm is that the geometrical structure recalls the concept of duality, the idea of 2 equal but opposite sectors." Cinzia Florio noted that the design of 3D yupanas is connected to tocapus, significant symbols in Inca culture, particularly to the Lave Inca, Inca key. Tocapus are geometric symbols of various shapes and colors found on art objects, possibly representing a form of writing. Much of their meaning is lost, as chroniclers did not record them, and clergy altered the patterns in weaving traditions. Chronicler Blas Valera, born to an indigenous mother and a Spanish father, was educated in both cultures, became a Jesuit, and excelled in Latin. Although one of his documents explaining the meaning of the Inca key tocapu was initially thought to be a forgery, many Americanists now consider it authentic after thorough analysis. Valera associates this tocapu with the number 2 and Quechua words meaning opposite forces. This concept of duality is also reflected in the geometric shape of the table yupana. Could these 2 elements be connected? The Inca key resembles the stylized image of a yupana, but the resemblance between these shapes was initially considered coincidental until Victoria de la Jara published another similar group of tocapu. By comparing all 3 to the Inca key, the resemblance is impressive. The table yupana appears to be represented by the first tocapu, and after 2 stylizations leads to the Inca key. This key's duality aligns with Valera's idea that it symbolizes the number 2 and opposite forces. Victoria de la Jara interprets these tocapus as 3 symbols of religious hierarchies, though she doesn't explain why. If the Inca key is a stylized table yupana, it indicates that this object was an extremely important artifact. The concept of duality was significant for the Incas, symbolizing complementarity rather than opposition, like man-woman, black-white, high-low. The concept of table Yupana and its stylized form, the Inca key, may be linked to the realm complementing ours, the world of pure consciousness or spirits, to the other side of reality. This could explain why the table Yupana isn't mentioned in chronicles, likely due to censorship alongside Inca's worldview. Notably, below the drawing of the legendary Inca lost city of Paititi, there is an illustration of a table Yupana. These Yupanas, also sometimes called geo-Yupanas, are believed to represent landscapes. The contrasting colors of the two sectors in the 3D Yupana, one lighter and the other darker, highlight its duality, but its function is still unclear. It was shown without explanation. On the other hand, Valera's decision to depict it suggests its profound significance. A zoologist and explorer, Hyatt Verrill, spent 30 years researching the lost civilizations of Central and South America. His work was largely based on his own experiences and the strange things he had seen in tropical Latin America. In his novel, he describes a pre-Inca city accessible only via a bridge of light, a bridge of ionized matter that appears and disappears at will, providing passage over an otherwise impassable rocky gorge. Verrill maintained until his death that his book was more than just a legend. Functions of 3D Yupanas might have been related to specific landscape features known as huacas, rather than just generic landscapes. Native people saw huacas as inherently powerful entities, not merely vessels for supernatural beings, but as agents with their own efficacy. The chronicles recount that the Incas consulted huacas for various day-to-day matters, much like one would consult a person. If so, then it might explain why Jesuit Blas Valera avoided elaborating on the topic, as the Church views such practices as demonic. Even today, interactions with what is now referred to as non-human intelligence are often perceived as occult, and just as in the past, these subjects are frequently censored, classified, or simply ignored by science. As simple as it appears, QUIPU's intricate knot patterns and encoding methods are reminiscent of an advanced computer-like database, complete with a meta-syntax notation to help manage it. That, in fact, makes it way more than a primitive writing system.
So you have the main chord or the primary chord to which are attached a variety of what we call pendant strings. So these are tied or these are knotted onto the primary chord. And in many cases, we have subsidiary chords, second-level chords that are tied onto the pendant strings. And you have hierarchical arrangements of subsidiary chords attached to subsidiary chords, attached to subsidiary chords, which are attached then to the pendant string. We have quipus with up to 6 levels, hierarchies of information recorded on the quipus. We also have some quipu chords that come off from the top, whose attachments bind together groups of these pendant strings. These are particularly important in terms of mathematics.
Writing involved creating a complex network of colored chords and knots, while reading required visual and tactile examination, sometimes interfaced with colored stones to interpret the knots' meanings.
When you look at them, you see the chords are knotted and the knots are in ranked files up the length of the quipu chords, as you see here. And this relates to the recording of numerical information in the base 10 decimal system of the quipus. So like us, the Incas had a base 10 system of numeration. So that toward the bottom of the strings, you have the ones, then the tens, the hundreds, the thousands. There are a few quipus that record up to hundreds of thousands, but theoretically you could record into the millions. I've not encountered a quipu that records the millions, but you could do it quite easily just with a very long string.
Researchers view the knot as the central symbolic element in quipus. Knots' construction and positioning on a chord represented data, while groups of knots formed data items. A collection of chords created a data element, and the entire quipu functioned as a data structure.
So in these different place values, they tied a number of different types of knots to record the values from 1 to 9 at the ones level. So those are the principal knot types. You have what we call a figure 8 knot that was tied for the value 1, and then 8 different varieties of what we call long knots to record the values 2 to 9. On these knots, you can run your fingernail over the knot and you can count the number of turns between 2 to 9. So there you can actually read the numbers. So that we can read the numbers on these quipus.
According to Blas Valera, quipus served as a dual data entry tool, allowing selective input of damaged, unused, and acceptable parts. The class indicator, placed at the end of the main chord, helped classify counted items. Such quipu was an efficient and flexible tool, capable not only of recording unforeseen expenses and programming balances, but also the health and productivity of the empire's population.
And now what I think is interesting about this is that, again, this is at the same time that double entry in Western Europe is being established. And it's a system in which you have values that are recorded in 2 columns. And in one column is the debits entry, and the other column is the credits entry. And those values are supposed to match between the debits and the credits. Those are supposed to balance. And that's the sort of core principle of the double entry bookkeeping system. And I just think we're seeing something like at least the structure of the duality and the matching of pairs of accounts. That is, if it's not double entry, which I don't imagine it is, but I imagine it's something that's on its way to a double entry-like accounting, debits and credits of pairs of matching quipus that we have here. And most of what we see is completely new, so we're getting really profound insights into the level of complexity of the accounting system of the Inca Empire, and it was quite complex, I think, indeed.
The simplicity of binary coding gives modern computing technology its flexibility and expansive capabilities. The important thing is that quipu knots can be assigned binary code values. Urton argues that each knot or group of knots in a quipu had a specific agreed-upon value or message. The closest analogy to this form of writing is programming binary numbers, 1, 0, in computer software. Moreover, Marcia and Robert Ashers have stated explicitly that the quipu is a general recording device, meaning that this device could have encoded any manner of information, from numbers to word signs to language.
So basically, when we're talking about quipus, there were essentially 2 different types of quipus. So there was one type of quipu for administrative work. There was another type, though, that, as we're told by the Spanish chroniclers, recorded historical narratives, recorded poems, recorded songs, all sorts of narratives telling the life history of the Incas, etc. These were a very complex form of quipu that I, in truth, haven't the foggiest idea how to interpret now. They're very complex. They are knotted string devices, and the knots are spread all over the surface of the quipu. So here are 2 examples of what I think are probably narrative quipus, ones that were we to understand how to interpret them, we could take information from them, and we could tell the life history of perhaps this or that Inca.
Inca bureaucracy used quipus to send and receive daily messages, crucial for managing the empire. These messages needed to be clear, compact, and portable, making the quipu an assemblage of knotted cotton or wool cords, an ideal data storage method. The quipu keepers, quipu kamayak, were responsible for encoding and decoding the quipu messages. But there is more to it.
We're looking at the numbers that we're familiar with so we can follow this. Those did not exist for the quipu kamayak. The quipu kamayak saw only the knots. And all of that math was being done with the knots, right? They never translated this, transferred it into a graphemic form. It was always in these 3-dimensional knotted forms. So I think that there's something going on in the minds of these characters that was just extraordinary, that we haven't even begun to approach, haven't even begun to think about the complexities of thinking in three-dimensional knot forms at the level of mathematical complexity that we've seen here. These are very sharp characters.
There's a key point here. Quipu can be seen as a rare example of surviving prehistoric 3D writing that represents much more than just numbers. It offers a unique insight into prehistoric thinking, communication, and data organization before modern writing emerged. Quipu might be from a time of the origin of individuality and reflect a shift to new forms of self. Soviet scientist Vladimir Kaznachev proposed that proto-humans did not have intelligence confined to individuals, but rather shared it collectively within a group. His hypothesis suggests that proto-humans had a kind of holographic intelligence, a shared symbol-based intelligence that naturally enabled mind-to-mind communication or telepathy. In this concept, psi perceptions like a remote viewing might be reminiscent of tools of such ancient proto-intelligence. Intelligence that later started to simplify and fracture its symbolic form into sound-based forms. Language emerges, which we have today and that operates in what's known as the Nalimov's semantic space, or space of meanings. This new space defined the boundaries for a new form of self, where higher cognitive skills and purposeful actions emerge from the basic drive of living organisms to adapt, reduce stress, and survive. Kaznachev believed that this secondary adaptive type of consciousness was a trade-off and sign of regression, leading humans to lose a more connected understanding of the world, pushing us towards a more fragmented and mechanistic view. This is so because this new self is unable to perceive anything otherwise than through opposition. The whole must be divided, and this forms our perception. We simply cannot perceive anything if it is not divided. Paradise lost. The gods returned to heaven. In the 50s, Charles Osgood introduced the special method to study perceptions. It is a type of survey tool used in psychology and other fields to measure people's attitudes or perceptions about a particular concept, object, or phenomenon. His method involves respondents rating a concept on a series of binary scales, each defined by a pair of opposite adjectives, such as light-dark, man-woman, or large-small. It resembles the concept of duality, which was significant in Inca philosophy. However, unlike our view of duality as opposing forces, the Incas perceived it as complementarity rather than opposition, defined by similar pairs like man-woman, black-white, and high-low. Minor change, dramatic difference. From Osgood's work, the term semantic space, or space of meanings, emerged, used in psychology, philosophy, physics, and linguistics, referring to a system that organizes meanings and relating part to whole. Physicist David Bohm later used the same concept in his hollow movement theory, likening the universe to a hologram. And what is interesting, scientist Vasily Nalimov expanded on these ideas, proposing that human consciousness operates within semantic space, organizing meanings like points on a real number axis, a concept reflected in the structure of a quipu. The difference in writing systems suggests that the Andean space of meaning differed from ours, shaped by the unique 3D nature of quipu. Professor Laura Lorinch Manelli highlights this in her paper, noting that both Mesoamericans and Andeans worshipped gods as numbers, a concept dating back to pre-Columbian times. They may have performed sacred calculations with divine numbers, but such practices were kept secret by natives and later censored by the Vatican, leaving little information available. Blas Valera's uncensored manuscript describes a type of calculation designed to connect individuals with the founding gods of the empire. A sacred number knotted in a pendant could represent multiple deities depending on how it was combined or split. The priest would transform a song into a number, anchoring the number god to a specific location and making it inseparable from that place and its associated deities, potentially creating phenomena like levitation or temporary stone softening. These phenomena could be perceived as tangible evidence of supernatural manifestation and confirmation that the sacred calculations were accurate. This idea relates to our earlier discussion on the boundaries of self. For the Incas, the boundaries of supernatural beings were dynamic rather than fixed. Viewing gods as numbers, they believed these entities could change attributes and share boundaries with others. By adjusting a number, a being could embody more or fewer deities, thereby enhancing its power and acquiring new necessary properties. Unlike the fixed identities of Greek and Roman gods, Incan deities were fluid and adaptable, more like a task force, capable of merging with or transforming into other entities. This adaptability allowed them to interact dynamically between the divine and human realms, influenced through complex knot systems and calculations. This transformation was seen as a circular movement, like an endless vortex, a process of continuous change and interaction among deities and their powers, calculated with simple tools. While the Inca civilization began in the early 13th century, quipus existed long before their rise to power, but under the Incas, they became a part of statecraft. Knotted threads have been found in various regions and among different people. In prehistoric China, it was preceding hieroglyphs. Chinese tradition often attributes the origins of writing to prehistoric knotted threads. The development of scripts and texts was associated with the creation of fabric or nets, similar to the textile traditions of the Andes. According to Furlani, knotted ropes in the religion of ancient Babylon were used for magical rituals of enchantment. The traditional Jewish prayer shawl, known as a tallis, features knots in number sequence on its fringes. These knots have been the subject of various interpretations, suggesting they encode numerical information related to the Hebrew name of God. And it seems that all these subsequent forms of esoteric numerology trace back to ancient traditions of holographic thinking, where numbers and words were once intricately united in a single system. The knot in a quipu is the fundamental unit, varying in type and direction. Whole structure acts as a formal language for organizing data. Professor Paul Bainan-Davies suggested defining this language's syntax using Bacchus-Naur form, BNF. He proposed using BNF to express the structural elements of quipu artifacts. BNF is a way to describe rules for programming languages, similar to how grammar describes the structure of sentences. Computers don't understand human language, so they use special languages where BNF helps structure commands. Bainan-Davies proposed applying BNF to quipus to understand how knots and their combinations form data, similar to how commands are organized in programming. In BNF code, quipu looks like this. Given its structure, the quipu is clearly a technical artifact that resembles an ancient database more than it does a computer or writing system. Some scholars suggest that while quipu served as an accounting system, the binary coding found in its knots indicates it also conveys narratives. Anthropologist Antonio de la Calancha mentioned that quipus could transmit proper names and names of provinces, and provided an example of a complex narrative quipu. He provided the only known detailed decryption of a narrative quipu, specifying the threads, colors, and the number of knots. Another anthropologist, Sabina Hyland, in her paper, presented new evidence suggesting quipus could be a decipherable writing system. Hyland examined 2 quipus in Peru, noting many symbols suggesting a system akin to hieroglyphics, combining concepts and sound elements. While most writing systems link written signs to spoken sounds, signs can convey narratives without replicating speech.
And then also quipus information about the business of state moved around the empire on the Inca road system carried by chasquis, an example of which we see here in one of the drawings of Huamampoma, in which he just emphasizes what this is. He has a little cartoon sign here that says carta, or letter, that's attached to the quipu that he's carrying. There were other uses of the quipus, so they recorded information on the periodicities and the cycles of celestial phenomena, of the sun and the moon and the planets and the stars. And so the calendar specialists were specialists in quipu keeping.
This special type of astronomical quipu was capable of handling large numbers, often overlooked by Western scholars. In Diego González Holguín's dictionary, numbers such as million, trillion, and quadrillion are mentioned. The largest known Inca number is 9 quintillion. Similar to the Maya, the Incas might have used large numbers for calendrical and astronomical purposes, though there are no specific references to this in historical sources. They might be also related to what Inca called the Ceque system.
The whole system itself, or the whole valley itself, was organized for ritual and political purposes by a system called the Ceque system, which was a series of 41 imaginary lines that went out from the center of the city and that organized sacred places called huacas, some 350 of them, along those 41 lines. And that was the sort of framework for ceremonial life and for the ritual calendar in the city of Cusco. And so that you had a system, something on this order, and those Ceque lines, those lines of orientation with their sacred places located along them, I think would have been understood as similar to the quipus with their strings and their knots. So I think the quipu was important for a variety of ways. One is as a paradigm, and I think the Inca road system with its main route and with notable places, the named places, the places that would have all been understood as having a particular identity, and probably, given what we know about the Incas, also a hierarchical relationship, one to the other, I think was thought of, or could be thought of, as similar to the quipu cords, which are these strands of spun and plied fibers with that are knotted.
The Ceque system was represented in the imaginary guidelines, radiating from the Coricancha temple in Cusco to sacred places called huacas throughout the Inca Empire. These lines were connected to geography and also the Inca cosmology, as each huaca was associated with celestial bodies like dark nebulae, stars, planets, and specific social groups. Though it sounds like just a philosophical concept, we have modern examples of similar approaches, such as the Sweden solar system, the world's largest permanent scale model of the solar system. Like the Ceque system, it features a radial design, but instead of huacas, it represents celestial bodies, with model planets installed in various Swedish cities. Chroniclers found it challenging to understand huacas, as these entities seemed to exist in multiple places at once, transcending their physical presence. Native people saw huacas as powerful beings in their own right, not just vessels for supernatural forces. Ethnohistoric records suggest that Andean people viewed huacas as having their own personalities, akin to what is called non-human intelligence today. Huacas were believed to speak, hear, and communicate among themselves and with humans. They were living beings with distinct capacities, moods, and appetites. Some megaliths associated with them, showing signs of stone softening and other anomalies, were also revered as huacas. These views were deeply embedded in their culture, and were reflected in the quipus.
The system of record keeping they invented with these quipus, the knotted cords, was one that allowed them very efficiently to produce documents displaying quantitative data on all of those matters of state, as well as recording in some way the identities of those. And so that's half of what the quipus were up to, what they were doing. The other half of what they were doing, as we're told by the Spaniards, is that they recorded their myths, their histories, their songs, their poems. And that's an area of quipu work that still is just a complete cipher certainly for me, and about how they might have been using these devices of thread and knot and color and number in some way to record information that might be interpreted by knowledgeable people to generate or to produce myths and various other kinds of narratives.
Any narrative requires a large amount of information. How does the quipu system store such extensive data with just simple knots on a thread? Quipu structures are flexible because they can convey information using binary code principles. Unlike other ancient civilizations that used graphic scripts similar to computer screen images, the Inca method is more like binary coding sequences, similar to ASCII code. Urton suggested calculating the information capacity of quipus by considering each quipu knot as a 7-bit array. Here is what he writes, quote, "The message that we perceive on the screen before us in a familiar script, like Spanish, Japanese, English, exists inside the computer in the form of binary coded sequences in which each mark, like alphabetical letter, comma, hyphen, etc., that is produced by touching a key on the keyboard coincides with or is carried by a particular 8-binary digit, abbreviated as bit, sequence of ones and zeros. It is a conventionalized arrangement of ones and zeros of the binary number coding system, the ASCII code, that makes it possible for us to communicate email messages. I argue that the systems of patterned differences in spinning, plying, knotting, numbers, and colors in the quipu are all binary in nature. These various components of the quipu recording system interact with each other to constitute what we may call the ASCII of the quipu information system. Quipu were, for the most part, binary coding devices by nature." End of quote. The variety of knot colors associated with meanings means their coding can exceed a simple 7-bit string, so it doesn't have to match ASCII code exactly. A key, like wood, stones, metals, plants, inserted into the main chord of the quipu indicated its meaning, clarifying the content. This avoided confusion in reading thread colors, which could change value with different keys. For example, a yellow thread could signify corn leaves or indicated agriculture, while with gold thread it indicated minerals. Some historians have compared quipus to a recording tool similar to musical notation, where the notes represent basic information and the performer interprets those components. Urton suggests that a quipu knot can hold specific information, with 7 levels of decision-making determining its significance. As we can see, it demonstrates that binary contrasts, such as the presence of a white or black stone, helped quipu keepers decode the knots. The signature of each knot could thus be represented by a sequence of stones, with the full set of knots forming a binary array. A lyrical digression. This concept is somewhat reminiscent of the biblical Urim and Thummim, which some interpretations suggest were black and white stones used for divination, possibly borrowed from Babylonian practices. In ancient Babylon, knotted ropes were used in magical rituals, which might have served a similar purpose in aiding binary array readings. If so, what information did the Israelite tribes decode with them? Spanish documents and chronicles mention that quipu keepers often used stones to interpret quipu accounts. Acosta described wheels of stones representing the binary readings of the information encoded in each knot. Each stone in this system represented a choice made during the construction of the quipu. For example, black and white stones indicated the binary decisions at each knot site. The final sequence of stones for each knot displayed the total binary coded information, similar to how ASCII codes represent characters in computing. For instance, a knot might be represented by a sequence like this. This process is similar to how ASCII code and computing technology assigns a specific 8-bit sequence of ones and zeros to each keystroke on a computer keyboard. Calculations suggest that each knot in a quipu could have around 1,536 variations, and with an extended color palette, this number could increase to approximately 3,840 variations. This variety exceeds the 1,000 to 1,500 Sumerian cuneiform signs, the 600 to 800 Egyptian and Mayan hieroglyphic symbols, and is closer to 4,500 characters used in the earliest Chinese scripts of the Shang period. The quipu's binary coding system, with its extensive information storage capacity, is comparable to ancient hieroglyphic script systems. Hence, quipus can represent very complex narratives. Ethnomathematician Marcia Asher suggested that numbers coded in knots could serve as labels to signify different meanings and things. And Professor Bainan Davies, in his paper, supports that notion too. Quote, "In this interpretation, a given knot group on a quipu can be considered as similar in nature to a modern barcode, with individual knots substituting for the bars of the code. The color of each chord is likely to have been used to represent the object being referred to, either in enumeration or some other form of signification." End of quote. Some sources suggest that the colors of pendants in quipus had specific meanings, e.g. yellow for gold, white for silver. However, these interpretations might be oversimplified, and the color codes have yet to be fully deciphered.
And that's actually sort of a fundamental problem, and that's the fundamental problem of quipu studies, is that we still don't know how to consistently interpret what kinds of information has been recorded. We think that partially it was done using color, so many of the quipus are quite colorful from the dyeing of cords or from the natural colors of camelid fibers. They come in all shades of browns and blacks and grays, etc. And so we think that color coding was an important part of it. Color was used not only probably to signify certain identities, certain colors had certain associations with objects or products or statuses, and also color was used to organize information on a quipu, that you would have chords of one color followed by chords of another color followed by chords of another color, and those color differences, we think, were the ways they organized different categories of information on the quipus.
But there's more to it. There are indications that they encoded arithmetic formulas in quipus.
And now the interesting thing about these two pairs is that they're two pairs of matching quipus. So that, in fact, when you read the numerical values on the different quipus, these numbers match those numbers. The further really interesting thing is that they record the same numerical values, but not the same way. So what they're doing then is that they're in these two quipus, I think they're employing two what I call arithmetic paradigms, or arithmetic formulas.
This indicates a sophisticated level of mathematical understanding and demonstrates the system's flexibility. Quipu threads could be scaled, were backward compatible with earlier quipu versions, and could interface with other configurations of counters. This flexibility shows that the quipu is a highly versatile and complex information system.
With the quipus, there were thousands of them, perhaps tens of thousands of them. I mean, we don't know how many there were originally, but many, many, because all of the records had to be kept of the all of these administrative matters, plus all of the stories, etc. And there was no like supercomputer somewhere where they did all that. There was just a series of lots of small computations here and there. At some point, they are synthesizing these data. So there are administrative centers, and they're taking in like a lot of information, and they're synthesizing. So, somebody here might give me a record of 10 of something, and somebody else of 20 of something, and somebody else of 50 of something. And I make a quipu that's in the hundreds because I'm synthesizing what you've done. So, but the interesting thing here, I'll just say, and then I'll be quiet, is that we have no quipus that are preserved from what was the capital city of the Inca Empire of Cusco. They destroyed them, or they burned them, or they hid them, or they did something. But that's where the server bank would have been, like the massive, like the large quipus. Either there was a huge quipu that they kept all these data on, or in fact they had aggregated the data and organized it so concisely that they narrowed it down to a small set of quipus. We just don't know how they were operating at that level.
In conclusion, it is reasonable to classify the Inca quipu as an analog computing device due to its continuous and variable data representation and its ability to function as a complex database. Meanwhile, the Yupana can be considered a digital computing device because of its discrete counting mechanism. Quipu, with its unique 3D spatial design, is a feature of Inca and pre-Inca civilizations. It stands out as an advanced technical artifact, unlike any other known from ancient civilizations, with origins that remain unknown. The problem is a vital one. There may be other means of registering thought than writing. Let's take it a step further. Knots, which form the basis of quipu, are considered by modern mathematicians to be one of the greatest mysteries. Knots can only exist in spaces with an odd number of dimensions, like 3D. They can't exist in spaces with an even number of dimensions, like 2D or 4D. So far, scientists have only been able to study the most basic knots. This means quipus, the knotted string devices used by the Incas, might contain information we still don't understand. Were there other ancient 3D systems similar to quipus? There very well could be, even in the most unexpected forms. For example, in ancient Egypt, Schwaller de Lubeck suggested that seemingly plain megalithic walls, often without inscriptions, might serve as 3D data libraries for ancient Egyptians, preserved from distant times they called Zep Tepi, or the first time. In this theory, the type of rock, mathematical proportions, connection methods, texture, color, and arrangement all conveyed specific information. These ideas suggest that ancient civilizations might have encoded data in ways we do not immediately recognize. Traces of their accomplishments may be staring us in the face without our being able to recognize them for what they are.